So it's not unusual for any camera system on a mobile telephone or smartphone to have some peculiarities, and the Z Fold 3 is no exception in this case, because we've got 5 cameras. We've got our 3 12 megapixels, our 10 megapixel front facing, and our 4 megapixel internal camera. And I've been playing with this phone for the last week, and there are so many weird little things that happen, so many features that either pop up or get removed depending on what camera you're using and what format you're in and what frame rate you're shooting. I mean, none of it matches up with each other. And I'm going to run through with you now what I found over the course of the last week. There are quite a few things on this. It's not unusual for any smartphone with a camera array to have kind of these weird features to it where, well, they're not features, they're quirks. They're a lack of continuity is what they really are, because we've got different hardware on different cameras. They're different sensors and different lenses and all the rest. So then the software would have to match up, and it can be a little bit difficult, and it's not always even possible. But some camera manufacturers or some smartphone manufacturers put more effort into this than others. There are just so many options here for Samsung to have to try and match together that they're just not. And I'm going to run through them with you now, because when you're moving from camera to camera, and remember, we've got our 312s on the back, we've got our 10 megapixel front facing, we've got a 4 megapixel internal. So they're all different systems with different lenses, the whole lot. The hardware is different on them, but you've also got different frame rates available. You've got different shutter speeds available. So when you're, and different formats as well. Like, I mean, you've got a range of different things. And when you're moving from one to the other on this system, they don't match up. And that's really important if you're going to shoot a couple of pieces and you want to be able to get some nice wide angle shots, or if you want to be able to get some nice smooth panning shots, you want to go for 60 frames per second. You might not have all of the options that you had at 30 frames per second. But anyway, I'm going to go through this all with you now so you can see just how many odd things there are on this camera system. I think this is really worth knowing. It is worth knowing your camera system if you're going to start shooting projects and stuff like that. This is a great phone for multitasking. You've got that nice big screen. If you want to just do all of your shooting and editing on this, like, I actually like doing that. I like using my mobile device to try and do everything and not take out the laptop or go to the desktop. So if you want to do all that stuff, you need to know what your camera system is capable of in each different mode. So if you're going to try get footage that matches up across the board and you don't want to have a nightmare in post-production later on, it is worthwhile knowing all these little peculiarities of your camera array system, because it is a full system of cameras. But let's get stuck in. I'm going to show you all of the just weird things that I've found on this camera system this week alone on the Z Fold 3. Let's do it. So you guys can see exactly what I'm talking about. I'm going to do screen recording for this one. So just looking at the window here, we're in HD 30. I've got taps enabled so you can see where I'm tapping. Nobody's using HD 30, but we're going to start at the very beginning. So we can see we've got wide angle. We've got our 1 times, 2 times, go back, 1 time, 2 time, 4 time, and 10 time. And actually the quality isn't too bad. And we can zoom in and out. And we can go all the way back to wide, and we can do it on our slider scale over here as well. And that's all well and good. Now, options for format, we've got our 5:4. So we can take it up to the full size screen, full width screen, which is a beautiful thing to behold on this. Now, we've still got our wide all the way up to our 10 times zoom. So we've still got all that. So we still have all of the options on 5:4. And if you go for 1:1, things get squared off. It's funny how we don't lose too much of our screen here, but we still do have all these options. Now we have this option down here for auto framing. And that's where if people walk in around the frame, it'll start focusing on those. But you'll see here, it doesn't have options for zooming or in or out in this mode. So bear that in mind. No matter what mode you're in, if you touch that, it's gone. Now that won't be enabled when you're recording. That goes away. So we can see here, that option has gone away. We cannot enable that while we are in the middle of recording. So don't worry, it's not something that's going to change format while you're in the middle of shooting. Now, if you want to do super steady, which is this little hand up here, and get your shot really nice and steady, if you're in wide angle mode, you need to bear in mind that if you hit super steady, when it turns on, it will zoom into 1 times, and we'll have options to go in that far for zoom, but our zoom range is super limited in super steady. Now there's a couple of reasons for this, and generally you don't, when you're shooting super wide, the shaking is just less noticeable anyway, but they need to have extra pixels around the edge that they can kind of jump in and out of, so the frame, it's zoomed in essentially, and then the pixels around the edge of the frame are being used as sacrificial pixels to keep the image in the center nice and steady. So again, super steady, you're going to zoom in and you're going to have a much more limited zoom range, and once you're recording, you cannot zoom in or out. So bear that in mind, it does limit your options. So that's your super steady. Gonna zoom in on you and really reduce all of your zooming options. And that is the same across all of our options in terms of the formats. We don't have the option to zoom in or out on that one in the normal format. And certainly once we start recording, that's it. It is locked in. Now, we have our little button here at the side. That's the only way that we can do it, which is a horrendous way to jump in and out, and not the format most people are going to use when they're shooting. And that is going to be the same in 1.1. Again, zooming in and out is just oh my goodness, it's such an awful way to zoom in and out. Nobody's going to be doing that in their video. Well, if you needed to, you could, and you could quit it afterwards, but not ideal. An unusual little quirk. Oh, and I should have mentioned as well that if you're in 5.4 format like this, and you do go for this option down here on the bottom left to have the auto framing on, it will automatically revert to 16:9 format. And that is regardless of the option that you choose, whether it's 5.4, if we go for 1, it's going to happen again. Auto framing is going to set it to a 16:9 aspect ratio, but when you get rid of it, it goes back to whatever format you were in, which is kind of unusual, but that's the way it's set up, so it's worth knowing as well, just in case you do want to use that feature. But I mean, nobody's using HD30, so let's go to full HD30. See what we've got there. Well, everything is the exact same. Everything that we just looked at is essentially the exact same. We've got our 16:9, we've got our 5:4, and we have our 1:1 formats, all of which have our wide angle. And if I go for, say, 5.4, and if I go into our auto framing again, 16:9, it's going to revert back to it. And the same is going to happen if I'm in 1:1. It's going to revert back to 16:9. So we'll disable that. And if we go super steady on, again, we can see on the side here, we've got our two options for zooming in and out, but we can't zoom in and out kind of manually like that. It won't allow us to do it. We turn it off and we can zoom in and out to our heart's content. So it's the exact same feature system on this. Full HD30 and HD30 are the exact same. But what if you wanted to go for 60 frames a second? Well, not from 5.4 format anyway. As you can see just above here where I'm touching, full HD30 is grayed out. We can't choose the other options. We can't do it in 1.1 either. We have to go in to 16:9, and you can see here the option is now white, just above where I've tapped, and we can now change to full HD 60. Super unusual. It would nearly make, if we just go back to full HD 30 and 4, it would make it seem like as if there's no option to change it. Now, that is particular and peculiar for this format. It will only allow you to change in 16:9, and we can go up to full HD 60. Now, this is where things get a little bit different now again. Our options in 60 frames a second are actually different from what we have in 30 frames a second. Now, as you can see, we have zoomed in, and if I try zoom out, we only go to one times. There is no option. We've got all the way up to 10 times zoom, and it's not really focusing great there now. That might be just because there's a little bit of an angle on the camera. There's glass right in front of it. I'm looking out a window. But the important thing here is the wide angle option is gone. Now that is a particular thing on this device for the frame rate. 60 frames per second will not give you wide angle. Your wide angle only has 30 frames a second. So that is particular to the wide angle lens on the back of your Samsung Z Fold 3. You can only do 60 frames a second in your closer zoom. You can only do it from one time zoom all the way up, which is unfortunate. It would be nice. Now, I understand why when you're going wide angle, they're less likely to be the sort of shots that you want to have kind of maybe a slow motion shot in. But still, I find an awful lot of camera systems, their closest focusing lens is usually the wide angle lens. And if I want to get some nice close-up shots moving slow, I want that to also have a wide angle option. So you can't do that. Now, super steady zoom. Now, how weird is that? If we're in 16:9 and we turn that off, we go as wide as we can. And I found this to be really odd. And what it does here is if we stick on super steady, it drops it back to full HD 30. So we do not have super steady option in 60 frames a second. That seems to be something very particular across the board for all settings on this system. Yeah, we're back to full HD 30 in super steady mode, which is a little bit unfortunate because, you know, you might not realize that when you change in and out, that it's not just changing, you know, to super steady, it's completely changing your format as well. A kind of unusual particular thing. Definitely worth bearing in mind because I don't think it necessarily gives you enough of an indication here. Yeah, look, that format has completely changed. Some really peculiar stuff. And again, if we do a bit of recording, we cannot zoom in or out, but we can do it on our touch buttons here. And I'd say the quality when you zoom in a little bit on this is definitely better than your wider shot, which is unusual. But again, just one of those quirks that I think is worth knowing about, because if you're going to do super steady to try and get those amazing shots, I think you're actually better off perhaps with the slightly zoomed in version. That's going to help with the quality just a little bit on the device. Very unusual. Now, let's check out our different formats that we've got. We've again got 5.4. Oh, wait, no, we don't. We can see it's grayed out there again. There's no 60 frames per second 5.4 format option on this. It just doesn't exist. And if we go into 1, we can see same thing there again. So if you want to do 60 frames a second, you're in 16:9 and 16:9 only. And again, I think that's really worthwhile known because there's no option for a wide angle 60 frames per second on this at all. It just doesn't exist on the device. It's just not there. So that's your 60 frames per second in full HD. So we want some nice 4K footage. We got our Ultra HD 30 here. So we've just jumped up from full HD 60 to Ultra HD 30. And what that does is that enables or re-enables nearly all of the options that we had in our full HD 30. So we can go wide in a way that we couldn't do with our 60 frames per second. We still have our auto framing in wide angle as well. And again, we can't zoom in or out while it's on. Turn that off. We absolutely can. We can zoom in and out. We got a super steady, which again will narrow the frame a little bit. And we can't zoom in or out, but we do have our buttons on the side. And again, I think that slightly closer option is probably the better lens in this case. But unusual feature for it. If we want, oh, it's so odd. If we want to change our format and we go into 5.4, now I just want you to see, we're in Ultra HD 30. Look, we're back to full HD 30. So don't think that if you're going to change format, it's going to keep things the same. Your 5.4 format is not available in Ultra HD, nor is your 1.1. That's grayed out. We don't have that option. So that's unfortunate. We only have our 16:9 option in Ultra HD. And you can see it automatically reverted back to that. Really handy. Otherwise, it's the same feature set as it was in the full HD. It's just that the only option that we have in this one extra is 4K at 16:9. Otherwise, it's the exact same. But Greg, I hear you say, I want that buttery smooth footage. Give me some 4K 60 frames a second so I can slow things down and make things look beautiful. Well, we do have 4K Ultra HD 60, and we can see it hasn't changed. It's still the same. So if we want to try, oh no, wait, we can't zoom out. That again is a peculiarity, a particular thing to 60 frames per second. We don't have that on our wide angle lens. We can certainly zoom in, but we cannot zoom out. Not an option. And the other thing is that if we want to go into our different formats, 1.1, again, full HD 30 frames per second is the only option. And same on 5.4, full HD 30 frames a second. Bit of a pity, we only have 16:9. It's the only option now. Again, if we touch on our auto framing, it goes into that wider option. But look at the top again. Full HD 30 frames a second. So it is a pity that it is not keeping it in 60 frames per second. And I don't feel it's necessary enough of an alert that we'd be entirely aware. That's why it's worth knowing. If you're going to do that, you're working off full HD 30 frames a second. We'll get rid of the guide there. Back to Ultra HD 60. And if we go into Super Steady, full HD 30. Not 4K anymore. So, basically, if you want to, the best way I think to look at this, if you want 4K 60 frames per second or just 60 frames per second full stop, you only have the option of 16:9 and your 1 to 10 times zoom. That's it. If you want to do anything else, you're going to be back full HD 30, full HD 30. They're the only ones we have. So you can do your Ultra HD 60, 1 to 10 times zoom, but that's it. And again, you know what? It's very similar if we go in HD 60. Those options again disappear. We go full HD 30 if we go super steady, full HD 30 if we go for auto framing. So guys, be mindful when you're in your video mode. If you're just going in between those different options, if you want anything else on 60 frames per second, you're gonna lose it. You only have the option of 1 to 10 times zoom. That is it. All of your other options will revert it back to your regular full HD 30. Now, if you're in full HD 30, the thing is, you do have the option to go wide angle. You do have the option for super steady. And you do have the option to go for your auto framing as well. So, it might be worthwhile if you're doing a project from start to finish to just go for full HD 30 unless you need 4K for some particular reason. But if you think you're going to get a wide variety of shots, you require a lot of different stuff, full HD 30 seems to be the main format around which Samsung have based all of their software pieces on this. All of the particular tools, the whole suite of tools is based around full HD 30, or at least 30 frames per second. And there are other options on this device, like this really poor quality internal camera, which is, I've used it for zooms. I've done calls and interviews on this. It's very good for that kind of thing. I didn't notice any discernible difference between that and just using a regular like webcam. It's a webcam basically. That has some different options. The other camera has other options then as well for your front face. I'm going to go through some of those now as well. But that's just standard video. Just standard video for your rear cameras. So you can see that there's a number of different quirks here. Like, we don't have continuity. And that's only kind of the tip of the iceberg, because we've got some other cameras to look at now. And we've also got our pro modes and photo mode. So if you need to get yourself a cup of coffee, now is the time, because we still have an awful lot more of these options to go through. Oh my goodness, there are so many quirks on this camera setup. More cameras, more quirks. It's just crazy. Okay, so I'm on the front facing 10 megapixel, and there are some quirks to this one. We're going to go all the way back again to the start, so we go full HD 30. Sorry, you're going to see me tapping about as I'm touching the screen, because this is a selfie camera. Essentially, at the end of the day, if you're using this, it's in selfie mode. Now, it's one of the selfie modes. There is another selfie mode. We'll look at that now in a minute. But again, we're in video, HD 30, and we have no option to zoom in or out, but we do have an option here for auto framing. Now, if I move back a little bit, we'll see if it works. It should be trying to keep, there we have a little bit. Now, is it amazing? If I stand up a little bit, maybe it might work a little bit better. If I move off to the side, it's struggling a little bit, but I mean, it's not the end of the world. Basically, you can kind of zoom in and out just a little bit, and so it seems to me like as if there's some sacrificial pixels perhaps around the edge there, but it's working out. And you can see it's jumped into HDR there because it's trying to balance the light from me in the center with the slightly darker areas around me. Gone into HDR. Now, options very limited on this selfie one. Like I said, we don't have the option to zoom in or out. As you can see here, we don't have super steady or anything like that. It's fine. It's absolutely fine. But there are some other kind of quirks as well that I want to show you if we move across. So the full HD, which is most people's normal and preferred option, and we have, again, we have our little up here to do auto framing. But I'm going to show you the different formats that we have. We have one feels really tiny on this screen, like I mean exceptionally tiny. But full. I mean, look at this. This is a wide format. Now you'll notice I'm an awful lot closer to you. Basically what it's done is it's chopped off the top and bottom because we haven't switched camera. All we've done is switched format. So we just cut away the top and bottom. And you'll see here as well, we're in full HD 30. That's important, bear that in mind. Remember, on the rear camera system, full H30 was the kind of, it seemed to be like the preferred format that everything was working around. Now, if we go from full, and we still again have in this option the same thing, full HD 30, it'll revert back to our 16:9 again, same as it did on the other one. So 16:9, if you go for any options like your this option here, we can do our auto framing, or if you go for super steady, which we don't have on this front facing camera because it's not stabilized or anything like that. If you go for any of those options, it's going to make it 16:9. So just bear that in mind. And again, this isn't like a bigger image. We're just losing the top and bottom and it being fit into the screen. So it's not going to be as good quality, but you probably don't need to see super good quality when you got my face close up like this. My apologies. Now, let's do a little bit of a switcheroo here. We're going to go, and this is the thing, if we want to change our format, we need to go back into, or if we want to change our quality and our shutter speed, we need to go back into 16:9. So we'll do that, and we'll jump up here to full HD 60. Now, full HD 60 presents us with the same range of options on this one, essentially. We've got our auto frame, which is again brought us back to full HD 30, 16:9, same as it did on the other one. It only exists for that format. If we go full, look, we're going back to full HD 60, or sorry, full HD 30, my apologies, full HD 30. So it won't crop out everything in like 60 frames a second on this. It's going to again bring you back to full HD 30. So the only option here in this essentially for 60 frames a second full HD is 16:9. Now let's jump up the Ultra HD 30. Again, if I want to for auto framing, it's going to bring back the full HD. And if I want to go for my other framing options, then again, like full, we're in full HD. So just bear that in mind. I think that's worth knowing. And then if we want to, we also have our Ultra HD 60. So this camera is basically, it's capable of Ultra HD 60, and everything else then is kind of a lesser option that you're choosing on it. So you're choosing to get rid of pixels and stuff like that. And again, if you want to try, you can go for your auto framing. Again, full HD 30. And if you want to change format, full HD 30. So just bear that in mind, guys. If you want to do your 60 frames a second Ultra HD, get that buttery smooth selfie shots on this front-facing camera, the 10 megapixel. The only option you have is 16:9, and again, that fits in with the format of the rear camera is all the 12 megapixels, where you have your 16:9, your regular full HD 30, and that is like that's the format that all the rest of the quirky stuff works with. But 16:9 seems to be a format that they're working around on. That's going to be most camera phone. That's going to be most smartphone screens now, and your YouTubes and stuff like that. Videos, it's a nice aspect ratio, but it's not going to take advantage of the inside screen fully. So we're maybe losing out a little bit there, but it means that we've got that one format across the board that everything, all of the different options fit into. And then whether it's 30 frames or 60 frames per second, whether you want to just do your conversions and stuff like that in your post-production, that's entirely up to you. But we're working off a 16:9 constraint across the board for all of our kind of weird bits and pieces that we want to do. So if you go for anything else and you want to fit it in, you're going to have to chop it down. So just bear that in mind. That's your 10 megapixel front-facing camera and some of the kind of quirky things again. And remember, this is just your regular video, because we do also have Pro Video. And look what's happened straight away. It has flipped the camera. So let's go in and take a look at Pro Video here now as well. Super quickly, before we go into Pro Mode, I think it's only fair that we give this this internal selfie camera a quick look at, because it's not got it's just not feature rich like any of the other cameras, but there are still some things that you need to be aware of. So if we go up, we have our HD 30, which, I mean, just no. And again, we can't zoom in or out. We don't have that. We don't have steady shot. We don't have auto tracking or anything like that. There's nothing like that. But we do have the options for our full HD and 30 for 5:4 format, for 1:1 format, and 16:9 format. I think what's interesting on this one is if you go, if you look at the top and bottom, the distance above my head and chin now at the moment, and I go, my apologies, into 5:4, you can see there's actually more pixels available than what we're getting in 16:9. So this sensor seems to be working with the 5:4 aspect ratio, so you can do a full inside video, which I think makes sense. But if we go into 16:9, we're essentially losing pixels, so we're not going to get that full quality. And I think 16:9 is what most people are going to shoot in if they're going to try get some videos to add into video. But your other selfie options kind of render that. It's a pity because it's a nice big screen. It'd be nice to be able to do more with it, but for calls and stuff like that, yeah, that's what we're working with. Now we do have our other options. We have full HD 30, and again, we can go into our 5:4 format, and it's nice and big. But you can see here, it's grayed out our options. So if we go back into 60 frames a second, and we're in 16:9, well, we're back to full HD 30. So across the board on this system, if you want to do 60 frames a second, your only option is your 16:9. And if you want to do your 5:4s, you're talking full HD 30. So bear that in mind. If you're going to do videos and you want to get some stuff for your, you've got your 16:9 full HD 60. You're going to lose your 60 frames per second. You're going to go full HD 30 gives you all the options. Basically. It gives you all the options. So that's your inside video modes for your internal 4 megapixel selfie camera. It's I'm going to call it a webcam from now on, I think, because that is essentially what it does. It's a webcam feature, which is a pity. But I do also like the way the pixels covered up for 90% of the viewing time that I'm doing on the internal screen. I use the internal screen a lot. That's another video. We'll get into that after. So let's go back to our Pro mode. Oh my goodness, there are actually other non-pro video modes on this. There's one more we're going to take a look at now. That's the selfie mode on the front screen with the rear facing cameras. Let's check that one out first, and then we can go in and check out our Pro modes, because Pro modes are quirky, but so are these other ones. So many quirks to this camera system. It's absolutely crazy. So this is selfies with like the 3 main cameras. So if you want to do selfie video, and this is looking at the smaller outside screen, while using the 3 cameras at 12 megapixels. It's going to be the best quality selfies that you're going to get probably on a smartphone at the moment. Realistically, it's yeah, it's great. Now I'm in Ultra HD 60 here. Again, most of the things are the exact same because it's basically the exact same camera setup, but just looking at a different screen. But I'm going to show you some of the like little quirks. Again, so the difference between this and the the regular selfie camera, the 10 megapixel, is that if we go into the auto track feature, the auto framing, it's going to be able to take advantage of the wide angle lens. I'll show you that now. So auto framing is on, and you can see I'm in the construction site. I got the hole in the roof and the stove that needs to be hooked up. But big wide option here now. If I start changing around the place, there we go. It's locking in for me. And if I come in a little bit closer, it's going to change. So it's like having a cameraman there helping you out, that kind of thing. But it's wider. It's a wider option than you have in your regular selfie one, because it can use that wide angle lens. So it automatically goes on to that the minute you turn into that mode. But you can see it's also dropped it down to full HD 30 over here. It's grayed out. I get rid of that. We're back into full HD 60 again. If I want to go for a super steady shot, full HD 30 again over here. So, but we do have our option to zoom in now. I mean, this is very zoom. If you were like, this is at arm's length. It's pretty close. Now this is this is one of the big differences. I gotta get rid of super steady for a second. So your full format here is different from your internal full format, which is 5:4. This is much bigger. Again, this is like your just your normal selfie camera. Your full format is whatever the screen you're on is, and this is the big wide one. And we do have, like, this is a pretty cinematic wide angle kind of vibe going to it, but very different from your 5:4. So full on this is very different, but again, full will bring you, no matter what option you choose, it's going to be back to full HD 30 frames a second. So just remember that if you go away from 16:9, if you go back to 16:9, you have all the options. 16:9 will give you the option in terms of your video quality. So you've got your Ultra HDs, you've got your 60 frames a second, but that's only in 16:9. You change that, you lose that. So bear that in mind. And then like that, the only other peculiarity or difference between this and your other one is that if you're in this mode and you go for your auto track and it's looking for you but using a wider angle setup, so it's automatically going to go in. And if we do that again, there is no option to zoom in or out on this, guys. Like, there's no zoom in options whatsoever. It's just going to go full hog, like full wide, and it's going to go from there. And for some reason, oh, and that is something, guys, worth knowing. If you hold up your hand, and I'll show you what that looks like again. So if you're, I have this feature enabled because I find it much better than like smiling or laughing or saying hello or cheese or whatever the crack is. If you just hold up your hand, you'll recognize that, and then we're recording, which is super handy. I find that useful. Now, it's not like as if you hold up your hand and it goes off or anything like that. You do need to reach out at the end and knock it off. But like, that could be really handy if you were going back here. Say, for example, let's get rid of this chair for a moment. So you can see it's that they're zooming in on me. I'm over here. I'm back a bit now at the moment. So this is, if I hold up my hand, will it recognize it? Okay, it's lost me, so let's get me back. Now this is quite contrasty. Okay, I picked up my hand. That's awesome. So I can kind of go back here, and if I kind of come into the frame, it's going to keep up with me, and I take my seat and sit down, and we're back to our wide frame. And like, there's a big difference between how wide that was and how narrow that was in our zoom ranges. So yeah, super useful. Let's just stop that. We don't need it. But there's some of the kind of quirks in here. Pretty much the same generally as the regular, just using your rear facing cameras, your front facing cameras, my apologies, the 12 megapixels. It's the same as using those, guys. It's just that your full is going to be the full screen for this screen, which is a different format. And when you're doing your auto framing, you can see it's a much wider option that we have than if you're in your normal selfie mode as well. Super useful. But I'll tell you what, let's take a look now at your Pro video, because you think that there was options like funky stuff going on here. There are still so many more. This is the more cameras and the more features, the more quirks. It's just bonkers. But we're going to take a look at the pro stuff now. Pro mode. And there are lots of things in here. I mean, there are lots of things in here. Now, depending on the format, again, we can get all the way out to wide, which is a nice option to have here in Pro mode. We have a couple of, well, we do have one extra format here. We've also got 21:9. So 21:9, as you can see, is just after happening there. It is going to remove pixels at the top and bottom of the frame. So it is going to be a little bit different in that regard. Now, you can see what's after happening there is the last 21:9 format that I was working with was Full HD 120. I need to go back and I need to change that back to Full HD 30 if I want to get back to where I was pretty much. And then I do have the option to zoom out. So we have our wide angle, but what's unusual about it is if I start recording and I try zoom in, I can go all the way up to 2 times zoom, but I can't go further than that. Now remember, 21:9 is the exact same as 16:9. We're just losing pixels at the top and bottom. If I want to go in, zoom in further than that, I need to start off in that lens, so the 1-time lens, and then I can zoom all the way into 10 times. So bear that in mind. That is, and that's not specific to 21:9. That is the same for 16:9 and the other formats then as well. So if I start off in this format, and even you can see it here, it only gives me the option to go into 2 times zoom. But if I start off in 1-time zoom, I go back out and start off. Basically, this is choosing your camera lens. So it's going to let you choose your regular camera lens, and I can zoom into 10 times zoom. And I do have the option choose my telephoto lens, but again, it will let me go in 10 times close. So if you look at how close that is versus how close it lets me in here, it's funny because they're 10 times zoom for that lens rather than a 10 times overall zoom. So just bear that in mind. And that quality there is not going to be the same. As you can see, there's a huge difference in the quality when we go into the telephoto option on that one. And I don't know if everybody using this camera system or camera phone realize that. If you go for 10 times zoom, but you started off in your 1 times lens, you're getting a 10 times digital zoom for that lens. It's not the entire system at play, it's just that lens. You do need to go into the 2 times telephoto to take advantage of the best zoom option that we do have available on this entire phone and camera system. But there are a bunch of other options that we do have here available on this that we just don't have in the other one. So let's go back out to kind of a regular type of setup. We'll probably let's go for an Ultra HD 24 frames a second. That might be something that somebody is interested in for creating that kind of cinematic look. And let's look at the options that we have. Now, we can use center focus, multi-focus, or we also have over here the option on our autofocus slider to change it and go into manual. And what we're seeing here is that focus peaking, which I absolutely love. Whatever is green there is in focus. And if we try zoom in a little bit. Now remember, if I go zooming in really far with this lens again, we're not going to have the same quality as what we have if we zoom in with our 2 times telephoto zoom lens. Look at the difference. It's phenomenal. But if I go into autofocus on this one, you'll see little bits of green on the fence that show me, okay, we're definitely in focus. And if I go further back, that green will start to appear around the edges of the leaves. That's focus peaking. Where those green highlights are appearing is what is in focus. It's a little bit of a visual aid, which is really nice to have, and I really do like having it here. Now, let's zoom back out and let's take a look at some of the other options that we have here. So we have, and I'll just go reset, and there we are. So we're back kind of normal. Everything is full auto. And we have a couple of lovely options here. We've got our microphone options. So we have Omni, which is using kind of all of the microphones. And there are a couple on this camera. We've got front facing, rear facing. We've got one near the lens as well. We have our option here to do front mic, and you'll probably hear the difference now because it's facing away from me. And our rear as well. And actually, I'm going the wrong way around. Rear is facing towards, it's facing away from me. And sorry, this front was facing towards me. And we can actually even see that on the little infograph where those lines are. But what I think is super on this system is we also have the option to do a gain here as well. So the 12 dB. So that should sound an awful lot louder than this, which should mute things down quite a bit. And we can see that up here on our little area here for our audio level. So we have those options and we can change those. Now, I'm not sure if it made any difference because I'm recording sound through my video screen capture option at the moment. So it's just screen recording, so it may not have actually jumped in and out between cameras, but they are very effective when you're doing your video. Yeah, let's just go back in, and if we go back out, we can do a reset here and reset everything. We've got our ISO option, so we have, obviously we've got our auto, but we can go 50, which is our least sensitive option and the best quality that we're going to have, and we can increase it. Now you can see nothing really changed there except for the quality, which is very interesting because what it's doing is it's matching the shutter speed, and you can see how quickly the system is doing it. It's real time. The exposure hasn't changed, only the quality has, and that's because this is the least sensitive and this is the most sensitive up here at 3200. Now I can then go in and change my shutter speed. Currently on auto, but I can change this from 1/30th to 1/12,000 of a second, which is pretty extreme. And of course, I can just go ahead and I can increase my ISO like I've done just to get that exposure back. But that's an awful picture. Look at the difference in the quality. No good. Let's increase our exposure. Way too bright. Let's decrease our ISO. And I think we have a nice little exposure there. No, maybe we'll make it a tiny bit brighter. And you know what? We do have the option up here for our histogram. I'm not going to say I find it super accurate on this, but look, if we do, you can see it's moving across. Now, the little bars that we have just above here and here, usually they represent stops. So if that was, this would represent 3 stops. Oh, we're switching video modes. You have to be careful when you're swiping on this device. We have our shadows on this side and our highlights on this side. So if I increase the, I can increase the exposure by opening the shutter just that little bit longer, and we can see it's all moving over to the right. And we also have it moving over to the left. Now, if I increase my ISO, that's going to increase it further. And we can see here, lots is overexposed. Everything has gone off to the right there. Now, I'm not going to say that's entirely accurate because we do still see some greens and stuff here. It means that we do have shadows. But there we've got it back in. And I'd say that's a pretty decent exposure there now. Probably pull it back down just the tiniest little bit. But again, Pro Mode. We've got all these awesome options. Let's reset again. Now, we can just increase or decrease our overall exposure. You can see histogram gone to the right, everything is bright, and histogram way down to the left, everything is dark. We've got 2 stops, and that seems to fit in with what we've got available on our histogram as well. As I said, we've got our autofocus. We can go in and out, and it is really nice to have focus peak, and you can see it there. Really obviously there now. Super useful, but we'll leave it in auto mode. We have our white balance options where we can go in and we can change our white balance, so we can make it look much cooler, we can make it look much warmer, and we can also leave it on auto. But there are some other options available on this which you'll only get under certain, and this is the quirky thing about it, only certain options will have this available. So where we've got a grayed out area here, if I change this to Ultra HD 30 frames a second, no, my apologies, not Ultra HD, not 30 frames a second. What we need to do is go back into Full HD 30 frames a second. Now, if I do that, okay, Full HD 30 frames a second, we can see standard is after changing here completely, and we now have a bunch of options. So, as with the other option, like the regular video, Full HD 30 frames a second just is way more options. It's way more feature rich than any of the other options. Like this is an option here to change our contrast. We can drop the contrast right down. We can increase our highlights, or we could decrease those as well. We can increase or decrease our shadows. So you can see there now, like, I mean, highlights and shadows are basically what creates contrast anyway. So if we just decrease everything, we're going to end up with the same kind of result as our contrast change, but we can make it a little bit more specific to what we want. Now we have our saturation. I can brighten things back up a bit, so you can see the shadows are much softer there than they were, and I can also change the tint, so I could make things look more green, or in this case make it look a little bit more sunset, and put up the magenta. Now that might work a little bit better if I give it a little bit more contrast, because there is very little contrast there. So we can see the magenta is a little bit more obvious there. We're pretty much regular and very, very green. So you can see there, if I wanted to try and make it look nice and warm and summery, we've got those options here. Now, what if I change to a different option here and I go for full HD 60? I lose that stuff. So just bear that in mind, guys. You're not going to have those options on everything again. But the great thing is it will retain those settings. The only thing is, if I go into my wide angle camera, it's a different camera. It will not keep those settings. They need to be changed specifically for each camera option. So you can see here, it's retained them. It has not retained them for the 2x telephoto zoom. So you're looking at 3 different cameras, 3 different sets of settings available, and not every camera available in all options. So we'll reset this. But if you wanted to, and I would love to see a way of easily copying those across from one camera to another, reset, and you've got the same look and feel across the board on these guys then pretty much, but it's not as easy to maintain those. You have to go in and do them individually for each one, and each camera, when you start getting into it, there's little tiny differences, so you need to change them up a little bit differently even. So even if you copy the same settings across, they would look slightly differently. Now if we go back into our 21:9 and we go full HD 30, you can see we still retain those options because it is the equivalent of the 16:9, but just with the top and bottom cut off. So that's really nice to have that option. This is your most kind of cinematic option here. Well, this is probably your most cinematic option, really. And 24 full HD, and you can do your different options here for creating your look and feel. So if you want to do it all in camera, this is the way to go. You got your wide, you got your regular, and you got your full zoom, and you have the option to change all that good stuff in there. But we do have the option to go, again, we can go 1x zoom, but we can't go wide unless we go back out and specifically select it. It can be a little bit awkward. It can be a little bit painful when you're moving in and out, but again, each camera seems to be treated specifically like as an individual camera, separate from each other. It's like they're not connected. So bear that in mind. It's like you're literally changing lenses on your system. Actually, it's like changing full camera completely, like lens and camera. So Pro Video Mode has a lot of quirks to it that you just need to be mindful of. But yeah, I hope that's kind of cleared some stuff up. If you're using all these options, they're amazing. And we do have this guy here as well, which will show you what you've done. And it is worth bearing in mind that even though we've lost a little bit at the side, it's retained that there as well. So it's super, super useful if you want to have a quick look through what you've done. And if you're getting shots, making sure you've got all the shots that you need. Very, very useful. So a lot of quirks to it. Remember, each camera or each lens, your 312 megapixel lenses on the back, are individual and separate from each other. But there are some which will not support all modes. So in this mode, there's no way of getting into wide angle on our full HD 120. That's only available in your 1x lens, so your regular lens. And again, remember, if you're going to go 10x zoom, you're not using the telephoto zoom lens, you're doing a digital zoom on your 1x lens. Now, if I go in and I select the 2x zoom in there, that is not the equivalent of selecting my 2x zoom lens. You can see there, it starts it off. So just bear that in mind. It will tell you when you're in the right one, which lens it is. So if we go here, it's going to tell us ultra wide. It's going to tell us you're in the wide, and it's going to tell us we're in the telephoto. So it'll tell you, that's telling us what camera it's using and what lens it's in. So remember, we got our really nice 10x zoom in that one, but our 10x zoom in this one is pretty horrible stuff. It's not great. So if you want to get zoomed in, use your telephoto. So that's it, guys. I thought I'd wrap things up on a little bit of 5:4 format internal camera for you. It's webcam. It's webcam. But look, that's all the different areas, and that's just regular video and pro video. There are so many other camera features on this phone. I'm going to be going through them all over the next few weeks as I'm working around the phone and playing with all the different options. We've got different slow-mo features. We've got hyperlapses. We've got all sorts of stuff. So I'm going to really go through them. It's interesting because it's the same camera system that's on other phones, including the Fold 2 before, but every time they do a software tweak or anything like that, it does change what the cameras can do. And the thing is, there's more than one way to improve your camera. You can change the hardware, or you can change the software. They're the two main ways, and obviously if you're changing lenses and stuff like that, but that's again kind of falling under hardware. As a professional photographer, if I want a better camera, I need to either get a different camera or lens, or else I need to wait for a software update to come out. And it's amazing what software can do. So I don't find this to be a bad camera system at all. I find it to be just very feature rich. It's just like most camera systems on mobile devices, they're probably not expecting people to go bouncing around from one thing to the other the way that you might want to if you were using this as a kind of a sole device for trying to get some good quality stuff. I, being a professional photographer, am going to play with every aspect of the cameras as I'm just using the device, because I thoroughly enjoy doing that. It might not be as important to everybody. You might never want to use Pro Mode, but if you want to get some like really good quality stuff, that's probably why you're watching this video. It might be important to you to know the specifics. They've seemed to have centered everything around kind of 16:9, 30 frames a second. That's your mode that works best, and that's because the hardware, the software, everything lines up in there. I mean, if they're gonna have to write different software for all those different formats and for all those pixels that are gone, everything changes. So they've stuck with one format and run it through, and at least that's been super consistent. If you're in like full HD 30 frames a second, that's going to give you the most features on this device that you can possibly get. You've got pretty much all the bells and whistles there. Would nice to see that translated across the 4K 60 frames per second, but the amount of extra pixels that are being recorded and the amount of extra frames that are there, I mean, that's going to be taxing for any camera system. It's why pro cameras are so much bigger than a camera phone, a smartphone. So we're asking so much of them already. I'd say I do really appreciate what's in the system. I just would like for this particular camera I'm recording on at the moment to be a little bit better. I do like the under-screen display aspect of it though, so I'm gonna call it even on this one. I just would like for it to be a better quality next time around. The 10 megapixel one in here would be a super nice option, I think, just to be able to get that slightly better quality and be able to take full advantage of this lovely big screen. That's it, guys. I will be back with more videos on more of the features. I know this was a long one, but there are so many things to cover on this particular device. That's what happens when we get all the bells and whistles and features. There's just more quirks, more oddities, and more things to review. So I'll be back soon with the next one. And if you've got any particular things that you'd like me to review, any camera aspects that you'd like to know about, hit me up in the comments. I'll be more than happy to take a look for you. That's it, guys. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye-bye.